this one. It's well, I wanted to ask you, what's your association with, does anyone have some knowledge of Lilith, or when you hear the name Lilith, do you have some particular thought that comes to mind in association with it?
I think of Lilith Fair.
Lilith Fair, yeah, that was mine too, Lilith Fair. And then my other one was Frasier's ex-wife. Remember that?
They did, Netflix did a show about Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and Lilith is like a big character in that one.
If you go in Wikipedia, there's a whole Lilith and pop culture, and all of, like, she's been in so many characters. Even in Scooby-Doo, there was the Dark Witch Lilith, was one of the evil villains. And so the name Lilith shows up a lot, and it's sort of, it's amazing because she goes back so far, like 2,500 years at least that we know of. But it wasn't until very recently that she sort of got this like cool, like, we respect her, girl power, feminist, awesome thing. Before that, she was really thought of as an evil woman. Like all of the goddesses we've been talking about, there's this thing about, like, they're scary, they're dark, they're bad, they're wrong. And then we find out, no, actually, they're just powerful, and men don't like that. And that's a big theme in the Lilith thing. So there's only one mention of Lilith in the Bible, like one teeny little thing. But turns out she actually is Adam's first wife. And so this is really the big story about Lilith, and it's such a great story. I mentioned it briefly on the Instagram, but it's a short story, but it's just, it explains so much about her. So it comes from, oh, one more person's coming in, hang on. So the story comes from Genesis. So apparently there are different creation myths, right? And all cultures have this, that there's like this creation myth and this one that's a little bit like it, but different. And you look at the mythology of people, and you'll find lots of different versions of the same story. And so there are two versions of the creation. I never remember. I'm going to do a mute, but you know the deal. If you need to unmute, please do. So the one story goes, apparently the older, more original story is that when God created man and woman, and created them both at the same time and used the dust from the ground. And so it's this identification with the earth element, with dust and clay, almost like how in Hinduism, how Parvati made Ganesha out of the clay from the ground and the paste from her own body. And so it's the same kind of idea that God makes a man and a woman out of clay and dust from the ground, and says, okay, good, you two should be together. And they get together, they're man and wife apparently, and they go to have sex. And Adam, the man, says, well, I'm the man, so I should be on top. And Lilith goes, no, I don't think that's actually how it's supposed to happen. We were created as equals. And so I think, if I'm not on top, at least we should be side by side. And Adam's like, oh, no, you're the woman, you're supposed to be submissive. And so she takes off. She goes, I am out of here. No, thank you to that. She basically runs away. I think she goes and hides in the ocean or something. And they send 3 angels after her. And the angels, they try to bring her back. And she's like, not coming back. And they say, look, if you don't come back, really bad things are going to happen. You got to come back, and you have to be obedient and submissive, because that's the role of a woman. And if you don't, 100 of your babies are going to die every day. And she says, basically, okay, I'll take it. 100 of my babies die. No problem. I am not going back to that abusive man. Kind of amazing, isn't it? And so that's really her main story. And so they say that when the angels try to negotiate with her, it's kind of a cool story too, because even God couldn't get her to do what he wanted. And so she's considered really blasphemous because of that, like really a bad woman, that she even refused God. And even so much she's blasphemous because when the angels came to negotiate with her, like that was the best they could do. The best they could do was try to negotiate with her, and she still came out on top. And she chants the name of God and kind of disappears. And so she's considered super blasphemous. And really, what's the word I put? She's hang on, there was some unnatural, wait, there was a word, hold on one sec. My notes, I was doing notes at the beach in the bright sun. So I went back and looked at my notes and I was like, what did I write? But basically she's demonic. She's considered, so because they had to find a way to explain that, I guess, which is what they did with a lot of the stories of women. Like a look at Kali, right? Kali is this super powerful, wild, primal forest goddess. And when the more patriarchal society started to be more powerful, the men took over, they had to come up with a way to explain this goddess. And it's like, oh, let's just say that she's subservient to Shiva. And so let's have this story that explains it. And so that's basically what they did to Lilith, was like, let's call her a demon now, because we don't know how else to talk about a woman that has her own mind and she's powerful. And so she became, after that, oh, and after that, by the way, the other creation story is the one that's talked so much more about in the Bible, which is where Adam creates Eve from one of his ribs. So she comes from him. And so by nature, she is subservient because he made her. So that puts him on the top, and that sets it all up for the patriarchy from here on out. And so Lilith is so like the anti-patriarchy, ultimate feminist icon of a goddess. Her main crime is that she sees herself as equal to Adam. That's it. So all she did was say, I matter too. And she became a demon. Arrogant. She's thought to be arrogant, blasphemous, because she refuses to be obedient. She's anti the feminist ideal. Then, the feminist ideal was always like Eve. Eve was essentially powerless. She was weak. She had hardly any power. She didn't really speak up or anything like that. And so she's considered the ideal feminine. The ideal feminine is someone who is easily deceived, like Eve was, whereas the non-ideal feminine, the anti of the ideal feminine, is Lilith, someone who's powerful, someone who sees right through the bullshit. Let's see, what else? She's associated with all sorts of demons, satyrs, wildcats, jackals, owls. Her name, Lilith, comes from the root Lil, L-Y-L, which means night. So they say her name means night creature or night hag, or they also say that Lilith means screech owl. So cool, right? And a lot of the Hindu goddesses are also, like Lakshmi is associated with the owl too. Even though she's sort of a more submissive goddess, there is that common thread there. So she's animalistic, right? She's a lot like Artemis too. All these goddesses we've been talking about, she's animalistic, she's wild, she's associated with the moon. We'll get to that later. She's associated with the elements, with the earth, that she was made from the dust and the clay. And she goes all the way back to the Dead Sea Scrolls. And in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they find her first in a list of monsters, and she's the first one mentioned. That's how much women are hated in this life. It's really, really sad, right? That she's listed first in this whole list of monsters that includes like succubus and satyrs and all these other things. And when they talk about her, they refer to her as strange. And strange in that time, it meant foreign. And so I found that really interesting, that she's talked about as evil because she's strange and foreign. And if that's not relevant, I don't know what is, right? And I was listening to this one woman talk about it, and she was so brilliant. She was saying that foreignness, it's really easy to view it as demonic, because what is foreign to us, it threatens us. There's a sort of death, right, about things that we hold as like, this is the way it is, what's normal to us. And then there's some foreign influence that might cause us to change the way we think, or to change the way we do things. And that's like a death. That's like why, this whole like make America great again, it's like death to that way of life, and they can't deal with that. And so there's so much anger at Black people, at women, at anyone who wants things to change, right? And that's sort of the essence of Lilith, going back like 1,000+ years, that she was seen as something that made people think, right? A woman who stood in her power was someone that threatened to change the status quo, and therefore she was viewed as demonic. She was viewed as evil, and sort of represents like the opposite of the MAGA nationalist sort of thing. She's the opposite of that. So she's a really cool, I think, inspiration and icon for present day, for our moment that we're going through. And also just thinking about how like there's such a knee-jerk reaction to anything like foreign. Foreign is seen as dark, right? Foreign equals dark equals evil. That's sort of like a thing. And so it's good to know that this is deep, right? Like may not change. Of course, we want it to change immediately. And it's going to take a while because this is how far back this shit goes. Thousands of years that the woman is not supposed to be powerful or speak her mind. Thousands of years that anything foreign is considered dark and evil, and that association of darkness even with evil, it goes back so far, and it's so sort of built into the system of having a knee-jerk reaction to things that are foreign, to be like, no, that's bad. Sometimes she's portrayed with wings, and some stories she actually turns into sort of a blue butterfly demon that flies away. Yeah, it's really cool. And you could go look up, there's so many images of her, and most of them are gorgeous. And one of the things too is that she has long hair. And they talk about that in the ancient stories as being like, ooh, that's evil. It's evil to have long hair. It means you're sexy. And the long hair, she would use her long hair. I wish I had long hair now. She would use her long hair to wrap it around men's throats and strangle them. Such a cool image. But think about it too, like in like Orthodox Judaism, women shave their hair. Because it's like hair is sexy and feminine, and there might be other reasons why they do it that I'm not aware of. So if anybody knows, but there's definitely something about that, like shave your head, like let's take off one of the things that really signals your femininity. And so that's really interesting too, is that she's associated with long hair, sometimes with wings, and also sometimes she has bird legs or bird feet or chicken legs. And there's sort of this thing of like in the stories that shows up in a lot of mythical folk tales, things like that. And in the stories, the man sees this beautiful woman and like, oh, look at her. She's so beautiful. And she's got that long hair and she's gorgeous and sensuous. And then, oh, she's got bird legs. So I don't know exactly what that's about, but I find there's something really comical about that, about sort of like the tricking of the man. And I think maybe it's just saying like you shouldn't trust women, right? Because they might look all beautiful, but underneath they're monsters, I think is probably, oh, there's a kitty. It's probably what they're saying. So she's shown with bird feet. Oh, also the bird feet are an association with the underworld. So she's like the underworld, the netherworld Eve. She's almost like the mirror of Eve, but the shadow mirror of Eve. Let's see. And the Babylon, oh, this is good stuff too. We talked a while back, I forget which goddess it was, maybe it was Lalitha Tripura Sundari, about pleasure. And pleasure, like sexual pleasure, how Lalita was this goddess who really came to show all the other gods and goddesses and beings in the world that you could be powerful and sexy, that you didn't have to choose one or the other, that you could have, you could be an executive, like badass, strong woman, and also at the same time be sensuous and enjoy sex and lust and love and all those other things. And so this reminded me a lot of that. And we spoke about pleasure activism. We brought up Adrienne Marie Brown, right? And so Adrienne Marie Brown, I remember, I couldn't find it. I looked for it again, but I couldn't find it. But I remember her telling the story about seeing little kids, like a little nephew or something, and how little kids touch themselves, right? That's like part of the experience of growing up, is you start to find pleasure in your own body. And then somebody tells you it's wrong. you know, and somebody's like, don't do that, that's bad, or like your hand's gonna get stuck that way, or, you know, all those things we tell kids, or not even just kids, like just anybody. Like there's such a stigma around touching yourself and pleasure. And so in the Babylonian text, they talk about how men who have nocturnal emissions, if you do that, then Lilith comes. Oh, my kid just woke up right at the perfect time. Hi, Munchkin. It always happens like that. Hi. Hello, sweetheart. So men who have nocturnal emissions, they should not do that, because Lilith will come and she will take some of their sperm and she will make demon babies with it. And so isn't that so outrageous? And so there's this association again. It's like death, pleasure equals death, sex equals death. It's bad. And they even said too that Adam, after Lilith went poof and she was like, screw you, I'm not going to be on the bottom underneath you. So he makes a new wife and he has Eve. But for a while, he's basically single before he makes Eve. And while he's single, he's having these nocturnal emissions. And while that's happening, Lilith is coming and making all these demon babies. And that's why they had to make Eve, so that it would stop, so that he had like somewhere to put it. So I think it's really fascinating that that idea of like attaching death and demons. Doesn't orgasm translate to a little death? Yeah, there's so little death. And it's so fascinating, like how cultures view death and how they view sex tells you so much about a culture, I think. And definitely, and that this was like orgasms and sex and all of it was considered, you know, demonic. And that, so death, as also the idea of death, that she was associated with sperm, she was associated with sex, she was associated with nocturnal emissions and associated with death, tells you also that they saw death as something unnatural, something like death was a punishment. If you enjoyed your body, or if your body, you know, experienced pleasure, that ended up causing death in the form of all these demons who would come and like destroy the world, or, you know, demon babies who would get murdered. And so it, you know, how this culture viewed death as unnatural, as something that you know, was like a punishment. And I think that definitely carries over into our current society too, you know, that death isn't something that we talk about, or it's like something that's like a punishment, or you were bad. Shit still continues in sex ed classes that only emphasize the risks and none of the pleasure. It's so true. It's so like, that's why I loved, at first I was like, I don't know, there's not much to talk about here with Lilith. There's like this one story. And now I'm like the more I got into it, I was just like, this is like everything that's wrong with our society. It's, you see how it goes back like 2,500 years. It is so deeply embedded in all of our systems to hate women, to hate sex, you know, that a man needs to have a wife, otherwise like he'll be tempted by the vicious seductress. Death is viewed as a failure, yes, as opposed to the most natural thing we can do. It's so fascinating. I think I love to teach about like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, right? I know some about that. It's amazing because it's like a handbook for dying and for that in-between state. Like they start to read it, I think 15 days before they think the person's gonna die. And it's like this guide where they go over every little bit of death. And it's so amazing to honor it like that, instead of thinking about it as a punishment or like a failure, something you did wrong. You couldn't keep your body going when they're meant to break down. And same thing with sex. It's like you're a failure as a woman if you want sex. Like you didn't do it right, you're wrong. It's really ridiculous. So the all-powerful God, he can't even control this woman that he created. The best he can do is like send people to negotiate with her. And so she comes to be seen as this temptress. She's associated with lust, and she leads men astray. And she's got kind of two different personalities. One is the temptress, and the other one is the baby killer. And you know, somebody, I heard another person talking about this, and he was saying even some like super hardline, like right-wing Christian, you know, religious people will talk about like slutty women as baby killers. Or there's a thing with abortion too, that like women who are promiscuous are seen as baby killers. And so that's really associated with Lilith as well. She's usually not both of those things in one. She's usually either the seductress in the old stories who's just luring men at night. She comes to lure them and make them have nocturnal emissions, or she's the baby killer. What they do eventually is they pair her up and they give her a husband in the form of Samael. And Samael is a fallen angel. It's Samael, Samael. And Samael's this fallen angel who's associated also with Satan. And the two of them, so there's Adam and Eve, and there's Samael and Lilith. And they're like the twin couple of Adam and Eve, but they're the dark twin couple. And in some stories, it is Samael and Lilith who tempt Adam and Eve and who give Eve the apple. And so Lilith is associated with the serpent who tempted Eve and got them booted out. And you know, maybe she just wanted to warn her about what an asshole Adam was. You know, be like, hey girl, you got to get out of there. And Samael, this fallen angel, so God basically is like, yeah, you and Lilith should be together. You two deserve each other. And I think they're probably fine with that. Like they're both cool and badass and dark. But God says, you know what, actually, I'm going to castrate Samael just so you two can't have any children because we don't want any more demon babies being born. And so that's why Lilith is always roaming around at night trying to have sex. Then it's just not fair, right? It's so not fair to her. The whole story, I mean, I know fair. I'm always telling my child, like, fair isn't a thing. Life just isn't fair. But you know that she gets, you know, labeled a temptress and a demon for not wanting to be underneath her husband. She gets given a new husband who then gets his penis cut off. And then she gets labeled a temptress for trying to find love somewhere, for trying to find intimacy and connection. And so it's like, it's also sort of, to me, like a lot about like rape culture, like, oh, she deserved it because she was dressed like that, you know, and she was a slut and she was asking for it. And Lilith really is that, like, they do that to her all throughout history. She's asking for it. She's a demon. She's a temptress. She's a slut. Let's see what else. Oh, she's associated, like many of the goddesses we've talked about, with menstrual blood. And it absolves men of any wrongdoing. That's the whole thing. All of this mythology about her, and so much of this patriarchal stuff is just like, how do we put the man on top? How do we make the man right and the woman wrong? 100%. So she's associated with menstrual blood and everything that goes with the menstrual cycle, and that grosses Adam out. It's such a little wimpy man, right? It grosses him out. He's like, no. And that's also part of why he was like, no, don't even come back. I don't want you. You're dirty with your menstrual blood. And so I think, I forget which other goddess, maybe it was, the pollution goddess. Which one is she? I can't remember her name. Matangi. Yeah, I saw you were ready to say it. So Matangi also is associated with menstrual blood. And so she's similar to Matangi in that aspect. Let's see. She's strong. She's in charge of herself. And then, I'm going to pause for a moment and see, anybody have any thoughts, anything to say so far? Or are you just like, yeah. You see why she was Frasier's ex-wife now, why they called her that. And just, yeah. And I think it's really cool, like the Lilith Fair thing. I love that they named Lilith Fair after her. Strong, powerful women. It's not a thing anymore, is it? They're gone. Yeah, it's too bad. Well, we'll go on. So are you all into astrology? Do you know much about astrology? Cool. So maybe you might know more than I do, because I'd heard of it here and there, but it's really fascinating, the dark moon Lilith in astrological charts. So the dark moon Lilith, well, first they thought long ago they thought that there were two moons, that Earth actually had two moons, and one was the moon we could see, and the other one was so dark that we couldn't see it. So that one was called dark moon Lilith. But then that was, shown to be not true once we developed better tools. But there's still in modern astrology dark moon Lilith point on the horoscope, and that's where it's the moon's apogee, which is where the moon is the farthest away from Earth. That's called the dark moon Lilith point on the horoscope. And so where your dark moon Lilith point is when you were born might tell you. It's really cool. You can go Google it and look up like your birth date and dark moon Lilith, and it'll tell you. And it has to do with your primal sexuality. Same like all these goddesses we've been talking about, they're primal, they're elemental, they come from the earth. They're about not masking who you truly are and what you want, like Lilith wasn't afraid to say like, no, I don't want it that way, I want it this way. I think that's really hard for anybody, man or woman or anyone, or any non-binary in between, just to be able, especially sexually, to say like, I like it this way. I think that I personally think that's really hard. So that point on your horoscope tells you about your primal desires, the things that that really super turn you on, or about the things that make you the most vulnerable, because often our strengths and our vulnerabilities are the same thing. Represents someone's primitive impulses, repressed sexuality. And it can have to do with like unconventional spirituality. And often a woman with a strong dark moon Lilith feels rejected by society in some way. And there's sort of can be an anger, or it can be like a melancholy attached to that idea. And like a lot of the goddesses we've talked about, I keep thinking about Dhumavati, the goddess of smoke who sits at the crossroads. Lilith is associated with crossroads as well, and how Dhumavati was so like marginalized and like, we talked about her as being like a woman who's aging and nobody even sees anymore, and sort of an outcast. And so Lilith has that same sort of feeling of being like marginalized. She's unconventional. She's a weirdo. People don't like weirdos. Weirdos make us uncomfortable, right? I mean, not us, I know. We love weirdos. We are the weirdos. But, general people in the world take issue with people who go against the grain, and that's really who she is. And so she's very much rejected by normal, quote unquote, society. I thought this was really interesting that Marilyn Monroe had her Lilith, her dark moon Lilith, really closely conjunct with her Leo rising, her Leo ascending, which is like star power, right? So she has this dark kind of like primal sexuality right next to her rising star of like movie mavenness. So that's kind of cool. I forget what my Lilith, mine was in. Basically, it said I'm a MILF. I was like, okay, cool. I can handle that. It was like, are you a MILF? Do you want to dominate and change your lover's diapers before you put them to bed? I was like, that part, no. But maybe the MILF, I don't know. Or like it said something about how men want to bury themselves in your bosom, which I have none of. But it's really fascinating. I think the article that I was looking at was on Medium. So if you Google Dark Moon Lilith on Medium, it gives you all the birth dates, and you can go and scroll down and what it was in, and it'll tell you about the dark side of your sexuality, but dark not as in bad, dark just as in like mysterious, like yin and yang, the yin side, the primal, the hidden, the mysterious. Lilith breaks taboos. She represents freedom, independence, temptation. Any thoughts? Anybody have experience with the astrological dark moon Lilith at all? Now I want to go to get a reading and find out more about that. Right? So one last thing about Lilith that's really cool is that she's also associated with vampires. Of course, right? Because, scary woman. How else can we talk about her? How else can we make her weird and awful? So I wanted to read you this one. This is straight up from Wikipedia. And so the vampire thing, it comes from Greek mythology. And so, like I said, she sort of shows up in all different mythologies, all through time, under different names, but they all have something in common. And so in Greek mythology, there's a race of child-stealing demons called Lamias, Lamia. And she is basically, her name is Lamia. She's like the governing goddess of all those other demons. She's like the head baby killing demoness. She has conflicting origins and is described as having a human upper body from the waist up and a serpentine body from the waist down, so mirroring that idea of the snake in the Garden of Eden. One source states simply that she's a daughter of the goddess Hecate. Remember Hecate? I think we did her last time. So Hecate is one of the moon goddesses, one of the unmarried virgin goddesses who, there we are again, virgin, weird, in charge of herself. All the Greek virgin goddesses were like independent, in charge of themselves, terrified the men. And so here we are again. And another, do you remember we talked about Zeus and Hera, how Hera was such a woman hater. Hera was the worst. So if you weren't there, basically in Greek mythology, all Zeus wants to do is have sex with other women, but he's married to Hera. And Hera, because she's afraid of challenging Zeus, who's the all-powerful god, she goes after all the women that he has sex with instead. So it's such a perfect example. You see it so much, like women who hate other women who would rather take down other women than go after the source of the problem, women who defend awful men, really endemic. And so in one of these stories, Zeus sleeps with Lamia. And so Hera, what does Hera do? Hera caused Lamia to turn, so Hera slew all of Lamia's children in anger. Awful. And Lamia's grief caused her to turn into a monster that took revenge on mothers by stealing their children and devouring them. Lamia had a vicious sexual appetite that matched her cannibalistic appetite for children. She was notorious for being a vampiric spirit and loved sucking men's blood. Her gift was the gift of second sight. Zeus was said to have given her the gift of sight. However, she was cursed to never be able to shut her eyes so that she would forever obsess over her dead children. Taking pity on her, Zeus gave her the ability to remove and replace her eyes from their sockets. Whoa, I didn't know what to say about that story, so I thought I'll just leave that right there unless you have any thoughts about it. But I'm sure there's a lot. I kind of feel like I need to digest it more, but if you have any thoughts on that, all she did, here we are again as a woman, and her only crime was having sex with a man. And yes, it was somebody else's husband, but I'm sure he forced himself on her, as he did in all the stories. And then she gets punished by the woman. And it's something like she can't unsee it. She's got this, to carry that. Her grief transforms her into a monster, I think is terrible too. It's such, here we are again, that we don't honor death. We don't honor grief. Grief is seen as something like, no, you're not supposed to have that, get over it, instead of something beautiful. Any thoughts on that? No, it's heavy, right? Yeah, it's really heavy stuff. But now she's really, I think, I went and did a podcast search, which I always do when I do these goddesses, because I just love to listen while I'm cooking dinner or something. And there's so many cool podcasts that talk about Lilith. She's really rising, I think, in the last, I don't know, probably century, but more recent, I think maybe the last 10 or 15 years, that she's become way more popular with witches and badass feminists and people who are reclaiming her. And so it's a really good sign that the ship is turning, that it might be really, 2,500 years plus of going towards the patriarchy and that women are sluts and demons if they want to have sex, and you shouldn't pleasure yourself at all, or it's gonna lead to death, to like slowly shifting thanks to people like Adrienne Marie Brown and pleasure activism, and like and all of us, you know, who are just like saying, no, I'm not going to accept that. Like, I love my body and I want to have pleasure and have fun with it, and I am worthy, and no man is better than I am. So I think we should spread Lilith everywhere, talk about her. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Y'all are quiet today. That's okay.
I had a thought about Eve when you were talking about Eve, how, like, you know, the original sin or whatever, that sort of makes her indebted to Adam, and like that just is this constant, like, I think of like women who are victims of domestic abuse who don't leave because they feel like they have this thing hanging over them, that they're indebted somehow, or they have to, like, you know, do something like that. And Lilith is kind of the opposite, right? Like, she's just like, I don't owe you shit and I'm doing my thing. And like that Eve is the model, like the woman who owes you something, like that you always have power over her because she's like done something wrong. And I love that Lilith is the exact opposite. Like, I'm out, like, I'm just doing my thing. I mean, that's just like, I've never really thought about that before.
Yeah, I love that. I don't owe you anything. It took me a long time to learn that. Like, I don't have to smile at you. I don't owe you. Like, you know, I was on the beach the other day with my girlfriend, and like we go to the naked beach, you know, and like creepy men will come up and like try to talk to us. And my instinct is always like, hi, you know, and then she's always like, fuck you. We don't need to talk to you. We don't owe you conversation. You know, and it's like, I forget. I don't owe them anything. But we've been so trained, right, to feel like, no, you owe. And maybe it does go all the way back to this original sin. Like, you all owe the men something, because your sin is what got us. I don't know, whatever. Yeah. Wild.
This all feels really depressing to me for some reason, you know, like, just, I mean, it's very clear that like where we are now didn't happen overnight, but like just to know that it's so like fucking entrenched in like every aspect of like how women are perceived, and you know, that, I don't know, like, I'm just like, okay, how do we even, like, I mean, I guess it's just like one woman at a time being like, I don't know you shit, fuck you. Like, you know, I think that that's probably, you know, what I'm taking away from this, that it's got to be like one step at a time. But man, I feel like there's some real heaviness around this, because like, yeah, like it's almost like, I don't want to say hopelessness, but like, holy crap, to think about, like, you know, the fact that entire like civilizations are built around these ideas is really jarring. And yeah, I mean, I definitely feel empowered by like what I see happening around me, and like people waking up and saying like, I'm not going to do that anymore, forget it. But like, okay, so like I live in Cleveland, and I live in a very progressive bubble. It's like really amazing to live there, but it's a bubble. And then I come back here to northern New Jersey, and there's like, you know, Trump shit everywhere, and just, you know, and there's just like so much of this, like, I actually saw a sign the other day that like just made me laugh, because I was like, what is this? It was like, Trump 2020, no more bullshit. And I was like, is the bullshit like Black people mattering, and like women actually like having a say over their bodies? And yeah, and so I get kind of like, I don't know, it just, it feels so heavy and so hard to like be in the same room with people I know who hold these opinions. And I know that there's nothing I can say or do that will like change their long held opinion about like the worth of women, or our, you know, our ability to do things just as well as men, or, you know, it's just mind blowing. Anyway, sorry for rambling, but sometimes I'm like, ugh, like how long is this gonna take? Like, oh my God. And it's like, I feel like a real lack of patience when it comes to this stuff. Yeah. So anyway, I'm really loving this because it reminds me that like, hey, people do care and we're not like constantly like, I don't know, just like being looked at as inferior or weak or what have you. I think that eventually things will shift, but like how long will that take? How long will that take?
Samantha, you're buzzing over
Well, I feel like I have some hope for hope, which is that, you know, we have, some of us have children, and what are we teaching them? And so I told my daughter, like, because, you know, I read Pleasure Activism when Kelly recommended it, and one thing that really hit me was this idea of going back and self-pleasuring before you ever enter into a relationship, and like look at yourself with a mirror. And I thought, whoa, like what if I was actually taught that from grade 4 on, you know? And so I'm teaching it to my daughters. And so I'm telling, because like it's, you know, unethical for me to teach, you know, masturbation classes to teenagers. So I'm telling my teenager to go teach them. Like, I'm like, go teach your friends about pleasure. Like, seriously. And my son's only 4, so Kelly will have to give me the Cole's notes on how to do that. But like for my girls, at least, I'm like, get to know yourself inside and out get to know what you like before you enter into anything with someone else.
Right. Like I can't even tell you how many women I know who are like, I have never had an orgasm. And it just like blows my mind. I'm like, how is that even fucking possible? I don't know. Like I definitely grew up with that kind of connection with myself. Like from a young age, I was always like very interested in like my own pleasure. But like, yeah, like to hear women that I know that I'm close with in my family say shit like that. I'm like, what? Like, oh my God. Yeah. So maybe it is like just having those conversations with our own. Yeah. I don't know. But also like I mentioned in the chat before, like how sex ed classes, if we even have them, number one, like if they're even available to our children, it's all about like, there are diseases, like how do we not get a disease? How do you not die from having sex, you know? And man, that's so wrong. Like that's just wrong. So like figuring out how to shift that too. Like I don't obviously have no answers here, but just like thinking about how things like that can become more of a priority, and not just like in our own homes, because yeah, like other kids deserve to hear it too, you know?
Yeah, and like my daughter's a really big part of the LGBTQ, I always forget the last 2 letters now, community. And I don't know a lot about the actual details of that. So I found out about, I don't know if you guys have heard of O School.
No.
Have you heard of O School? It's for adults too, but it has sections on like, that is all sex positive. Like, it's not like you're gonna die if you do this. It's like, super sex positive, but like especially having a daughter who is asking me sort of like how to pleasure a woman, and I'm going, well, I kind of know, but I kind of don't know, so go to this website because there's all this cool stuff on how to pleasure women like from a woman's perspective. And so I can send her to this really awesome resource. Like if you just Google, because it's kind of a funky way how it's written, but it's basically O School, and if you Google it, it's got everything you could imagine, and it's all in a sex positive way. So I send my daughter there when I don't know the answer. So
yeah, that's great. I think any alternative to like, you know, your classic really shitty patriarchal porn is going to be wonderful.
yeah.
Amazing.
Definitely. I made him read an article, I forget where I found it, about why porn is anti-women. He's 13 and he was like, Mom, stop. And I was like, no, you need to read this. But it's happening too. I know that not too far from where we live, where we are up here, I've seen like sex ed classes that are super positive for kids, like up more near Hudson.
Yeah.
Really teaching kids, and they're like super welcoming and, you know, non-binary welcoming and everything. So I think it is happening, but it's true. Like when you drive around upstate New York or New Jersey, it's terrifying. It's terrifying. I know. We were at the beach this weekend, and I can't tell you how many Trump signs and Trump t-shirts I saw. And I came home crying. And then you have to remember, like, it's, for me, it helps to sort of give up hope on changing the big picture,
Right.
you know, because I don't know that we're going to do that just yet. Maybe. But that, like what Samantha was saying, like focus really small and one little person at a time. We're not going to change everybody right away.
I've been revisiting Joseph Campbell recently, and he talks about the importance of finding new myths. You know, like if we think about these myths and how disempowering they are for women, although like we can look at Lilith and say like, oh, she's a badass and she can do all these things and isn't that cool? But like this myth was created to make women feel terrible for wanting to have power and to make men see women who want to have power as monsters, right? So it's like, how do we rewrite those myths, or how do we write new myths that actually embrace what it is to be a woman, that actually embrace what it is to be a Black person in America, that actually, you know, empower us versus disempower us? Because, you know, the white man has had enough time being empowered by myth. Like that's we can let those myths kind of fall to the back burner for a while, forever.
Wow, I'm into that. I mean, that's the thing that I keep coming across when I'm reading like any kind of myths. I'm like, this is just through the lens of some old white guy. Like, this sucks and I don't want to read this. So, like, yeah, please write them. Somebody please write them so I can love them again.
Yeah, that's like I keep saying I'm going to do it, and I don't, but maybe this will give me the kick in the butt. But that's for the last like 5 years. I've been saying I need to rewrite these stories. I need to come a book, because people are always asking me, what's a great mythology book? And I'm like, there's nothing. There's like 0 things that I recommend, because they're most written by men or they're written by women, but they tell the men's stories. So yeah, let's write. We should start.
And it's that funny thing of like, we look at myths for so much wisdom, and there is wisdom to be found in it, but like, then how do we separate? It's like, how do you have that discernment? How do you separate the wisdom from what is kind of propaganda?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah.
Ooh.
I feel really grateful that we're all here together, and we're going to do it. We're going to change history little by little.
We just have to keep telling the stories and telling them our way.
Yeah. Yeah, Samantha.
Sorry, my kid's being loud too. I was just going to recommend a book called, if you guys have heard of it, The Holy Wild by Danielle Dulski. Because there's so many journaling exercises in there where she gets you to rewrite these exact myths you're talking about.
The Holy
And her
Wild?
are awesome. The Holy Wild.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
Danielle Dulski. Hero. And I have worked with my classes and used some of her prompts to get them to rewrite myths. And it's such a powerful thing, especially in a group, because, Danielle Dulski, Jen, yeah. Dulsky. I've done it in group settings, and people just, like, women just bawl, like, after they read their own myths out loud.
Oh.
So if you do it, even if you're by yourself,
Yeah.
read it out loud to yourself or to a friend or something, because there's something profound in voicing it. Yeah, Jeanette, that's exactly it.
Thank you. That's amazing. I'm gonna try it today. Let's buy it from a Black-owned bookstore, not Amazon. Awesome.
I'm on it.
Yeah.
No.
Wow. Thank you, my friends, my powerful lady gang. I'm so grateful we could be here. I was going to do, unless you have suggestions, I was going to go for some Egyptian goddesses next. I thought that would be fun. Yeah. So that'll be next week. I'm back. I'm ready for every week again. I got a little overworked there for a moment, but I'm ready again. So, awesome. I'll see you in the virtual world. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thanks, Callie.
you, Elizabeth Akron. More resources. Cool. Thank you. Yay.
Oh yeah, Elizabeth. Yeah, Elizabeth or Rachel Cargill's website. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Cool. All right.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.